Hi guys, my name is Kretz and today we're going to be talking about the best Nikon lens for cropped sensor cameras, well, at least in my opinion. This is the lens for DSLR's cameras, but it can also be used in contemporary mirrorless. And who am I to judge, actually? And well, first of all, if you think there's a lot of unnecessary information for you here, just use the timestamps in the description. And the episodes down here below the video, this red line, just tap or click whatever you want. There are episodes, just click to the information that you really need in this video, because I'm going to be talking a lot here and tell you the full history of my experience with this lens and all the characteristics that I figured out. So just don't waste your time, use timestamps and episodes. And now, who am I to judge this lens? Because I'm being a Canon user for many years, and I've actually tested and reviewed, I believe, over 20 Canon bodies and maybe few dozens of lenses for Canon systems. So I have a little bit of experience in that. But concerning the Nikons, I've only had D50, D60 and these D7000 in my hands. And of the lenses, I've only tested these kit lens 18 to 55, the super zoom kit lens 18 to 105, this full frame 50 to 50 f1.4, which I hope to test with a full frame camera one day, and today's object, the 35 1.8G lens, and that's the best, I think, of all. So I haven't experienced all the other Nikon lenses, which are a lot out there, and I'm sorry for that, but judging from my Canon experience, I really think this is the best, and let me explain you why. Yes, I'm no specialist in Nikons, but I know that there is something like 17 to 55 f2.8, which may be better than this, but it's zoom, it's a little bit different. So, well, anyway, if you know any other lenses that could be better than this overall, then of course, definitely leave a comment down below and let me know. Well, first, how the Canon user got into the Nikon systems. Well, actually, that's easy. One of my subscribers actually gave me this D7000 camera as a birthday gift, and he said it's malfunctioning. He said something's wrong with its autofocus and it's old. Yeah, it's been well used, so it's cheap, and yeah, he gifted it to me. But I figured out it's totally fine. I haven't found any mistakes with the autofocus or anything else. It's perfectly working camera. And for a review, he gave me this lens, the 35 f1.8, and I felt so in love with both the camera and the lens. It's a great combination. This camera is so advanced. It has so many different features. By the way, if you want the review of it, just leave a comment down below. That I decided not to sell it and leave it for myself along with the lens, and I asked that guy if he wants to sell this lens to me, and he agreed. So I bought it off from him, and later I bought the additional battery grip for it and some other accessories. So this is the D7000, very good camera with the best lens. So that's how I just get acquainted with this lens. He also gave it to me with this kit lens, and later for myself I purchased this 51.4 1.4 aperture for future full frame reviews. And now let's talk about the history of this lens itself. I do not know much about Nikon, as I've told you, but what I know is these lenses actually differ quite significantly, because let's start with the Canon, who's changed the bayonet, the mount. In 1987, they invented and introduced the Canon EOS line of cameras, their first autofocusing system that lasts till this day. Just recently, they switched the mount again from EF and EFS and EFM to RF and RFS to the mirrorless. And but since 1987 till 2018, I believe, they had these EF mount, and all the lenses had the autofocusing motors right inside of the lens. But Nikon went the other way. They didn't switch their mount, which started back in somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, and they decided to keep that mount but start doing autofocusing systems. So what they did is they implemented the motor inside of the camera, like this one. This has the motor inside. And these old lenses, like this one, 51.4, don't have the motor in them. They're fully mechanical, but they have these screwdriver mount, so to say, screwdriver point of attachment. And the cameras, as I've told you, have screwdrivers, like literal screwdrivers that attach to the lens, and they turn and rotate and make the autofocusing happen with the gears inside of the lens. So, but later Nikon probably realized their mistake, and they joined the Canon and other manufacturers and started producing lenses with the motors inside of the lenses, like these G-series lenses, this Kretz lens 18-55 and this 35 1.8. So this lens has a motor inside of it, and luckily D7000 has both options. It has the screwdriver motor inside of it, so I can use it with the old lenses, and of course it can operate with the contemporary lenses with the motors built in. But some of the more recent cameras, I'm talking about DSLRs of course, just before the same 2018, when Nikon as well joined Canon in starting to produce the mirrorless cameras. So the more recent cameras like the D60 that I reviewed don't have the screwdriver motor, and this lens can be used with the D60 and all the later cameras, but those cameras cannot use the old lenses that don't have the motor. So that's the story. This more contemporary lens, but it is still quite old. It's almost 15 years. Nikon started producing them in 2009. But it's still very viable lens and very nice. And it can also, unlike these old screwdriver lenses, this can also be used in modern mirrorless lenses with the mirrorless cameras with the adapters. So that's a good news. This lens can be used in contemporary Nikon mirrorless cameras, unlike these screwdriver without motor lenses. Now a few words about this size. It's really compact lens. It's quite small. Of course it's not a pancake lens. It's bigger than pancake, but it's really small, compact, very comfortable for everyday use and to carry it around with you. And now the 35mm. What about it? It's actually, on a cropped sensor camera, it's very comfortable focal length. It's not that wide, it's not that telephoto, it's about the standard angle of view. And with the Nikon's crop factor for this DX, which is for cropped sensor cameras, crop factor is 1.5, so this is quite the equivalent of the 50mm on a full frame. So this is just the golden standard for full frame 50mm, and this for crop sensor cameras APS-C is pretty much the same, the golden standard. It has very natural perspective, nothing distorted really. I mean, in terms of the perspective. About the barrel distortion, I'll tell you a few words later. And it's not so wide, but you still can shoot some landscapes with it. You can still shoot some events indoors, say with your family, on your parties, birthday parties. Maybe some reportage, I mean like photojournalism. It's quite possible to shoot with this lens, especially with this nice camera, which has, you know, quite nice frame rate and overall quality. And it is slightly telephoto for the portraits. It's telephoto enough for casual portraits, for street photography, you know, for your family, for animal shooting, your dog or cat at home. It's really nice, and considering it's fast as f1.8, it's really good to give you a bokeh, give you a shallow depth of field. So you can use it artistically pretty much, and it's quite usable, and you can leave it on your camera at all times. It may be even more preferable than these 18-55, which of course most versatile considering the focal length, you know, the range, but it is really dull in the aperture department, which is 3.5 to 5.6. Uninteresting, really dull and dark. You can shoot this lens in the dark, not in the pure dark, but of course in the darker, much darker condition than this. It will give you the advantage and give you the cleaner pictures with the lower ISO. So very versatile lens. And now again, comparing to the Canons, nothing like that actually exists in Canon world. The Canon lenses for DSLRs were the fastest were 2.8, and this is 1.8, which is much better. It's the whole stop plus a third of a stop faster than the fastest 2.8 Canon lenses. They have two exceptions, but those were for mirrorless FM mount. Canon has 22 f2 and 32 1.4. Yeah, 32 1.4 might be more preferable and better than this, but for DSLRs, Canon have nothing like that. And if you're still on a really tight budget and you want to use the crop sensor cameras, you don't have such option for Canon's DSLRs, but you have it for Nikons. So very nice, versatile, and it's not so expensive. It is really very affordable lens, considering the possibilities and the artistic application that it can give you. Now let's start the review itself. What this lens is about? It's actually quite cheaply built, and it's not far from this kit lens, which is really cheaply built, cheap plastic, not so reliable in your hands. It feels cheap, really. And this lens actually feels cheap as well. But it has some really nice features. Let me show it to you. Let's just switch the lenses not to leave the bayonet unfilled. This lens actually has the metallic mount, which is good. Not all the cheap lenses actually have metallic. Some of them has plastic. It has electronic contacts, which is just fine. I'm showing it to you on the B-roll. It's fine. And what's the good news? It actually has wear-the-sealing gasket around it. And that's really interesting because none of the Canon cheap lenses have it. Not even all the luxury, the L lenses, the best Canon lenses, not all of them has this weather-sealing gasket, but this has the rubber ring around the mount, so it protects from dust and moisture, which is really good. Really nice to see in such a not really expensive lens. Now, what's next? We have some encryption here, telling you what this lens is about. And then we have this switch. The only switch on this lens, and it's very simple. It says MA, M/A, and M. It's quite weird because Canon has AF/MF, autofocus or manual focus. But this actually means the M means the manual focus, so you rotate the ring and you change the focus. And MA means that it can autofocus, as I've told you with all the contemporary cameras, but it can also be overridden with the turning of the ring. So we come to that the motor here is so-called SWM, silent wave motor, which is the equivalent to the Canon's USM, ultrasonic motor. And I'll show you just in a second, but I want to tell you that you can operate it even if it's set to auto here. You can still rotate the ring and not be concerned that you can break the motor or something. And now, these things are actually combined, I mean the topics of the ring and the motor itself. And let's see how it works. Let's switch it back again and show you the motor. And the motor itself is really very silent, very quiet, and very precise. So no problems with that. Let me put on the cap so that the lens tries to autofocus. All right. You can barely see this weird sound, like, bird tweet or something like that. It's really silent. It's quite fast and very accurate, at least with this camera. Some say that the D7000 has inaccurate autofocusing. I wouldn't notice any of that. It's pretty precise with any of the autofocusing lenses that I had. So the autofocus here is really nice, fast, accurate, and silent. And you can also rotate this focusing ring anytime. It is quite smooth, but it's a little bit sandy, I would say. When you turn it, you feel the gears, like some sand is inside of it. So it's not the nicest rings I've ever touched, But it's quite alright, considering that most of the times, probably 99% of the time, you wouldn't need this ring at all because autofocusing works just fine. What's really important about the autofocus here is that the autofocusing is fully and totally internal. So nothing, no element rotates or extends from the barrel of the lens. Unlike this lens, it extends when you're focusing, the outer element actually extends and collapses back. And here, with this old kit lens, this front element actually both extends and rotates, and that's terrible, really. Why is that? Because if it's fully internal first, it basically eliminates the chance of breaking your motor when say these elements or the focusing ring rotates like here or here, and you bump into it and you touch it, you can actually break the motor by not allowing it to spin. And the second, if the front element rotates and extends, it can actually spoil the use of the filters, your polarizing filters or gradient filters. If the element rotates, it will definitely mess with your setting of the CPL or gradual filter. So it's almost impossible to use filters if the front element rotates and extends. So nothing like that here, fully internal focusing, which is, well, the best you can have. It also doesn't have hard stops, so you can rotate it however you want and like, and you actually feel the stops somewhere when you're out of the range, when the range finishes at the minimum focusing distance and at the infinity, but you can rotate past that and do no damage to the focusing motor. So rotating forever, and that's a really good thing. No hard stops is quite convenient. And another thing to talk about is the minimum focusing distance, which is here, 0.3 meters, so just 30 centimeters. It's not the closest that you can get. Say the Canon full-frame 35 f2 that I own has the 24 centimeters, which is much closer than this. But that's a full frame, that's easier for them, and this is for crop sensor cameras. Well, 30 centimeters is not bad enough. Considering that the 35 millimeters on the cropped sensor gives a little bit more reach, a little bit more zoomed in picture, the 30 centimeters is quite nice. You can shoot quite close to your subject, so get some kind of, close to macro shots and have a lot of bokeh with this wide open f1.8 aperture. But just beware about the picture quality, of which I'll tell you in a second. Unlike most of the kit lenses like this 1855, which is dirt cheap, but it has image stabilizer, which Nikon calls VR, which is something like vibration reduction. And this 35 1.8 doesn't have the image stabilization. That's a pity, because it could be handy for this focal length on the cropped sensor cameras. And for example, Canon has the EF-35 f2 IS USM lens, and I happen to own it, and it's a brilliant lens, but it's much more expensive, it's heavier, and it's bigger. So this lens, being compact and really light and inexpensive, well, can get away without the image stabilizer. Now going further is actually the bayonet for this small lens hood, which is the model is called HB46. And it's really small. So it's nice, it's compact, you can reverse mount it, so it's easy to keep it, and you can also keep it on your camera at all times. I'm not sure how much it actually protects from the side light or from the direct light. But it's nice, to keep it from a direct impact or something like that, from drops of water, from the rain, from the snow. But it's really small. I don't think it makes much difference, but it's nice to have it, and it comes in a kit with the lens. And then the last thing that we need to talk about is, of course, the diameter of the entrance pupil, and that is 52 millimeters. It is quite small, and I have the filter right here. It's a simple UV filter, just to protect the front elements from the direct impact. So, I mean, the diameter is quite small, and so the filters are gonna be cheap, and you can use any types of filters because it has the thread for it. So no problem about that. That's the build, quite cheap and simple, but actually quite usable and nice build quality, and hopefully it is reasonably weather sealed considering it has the rubber gasket around the mount. So that's about the build quality. Now a few words about the picture quality. First, the barrel distortion. Surprisingly, for this focal length, it actually has it, the barrel distortion, so your lines are bending a little bit around the frame. It's far from fisheye, of course, or something like that, but it has a little bit of barrel distortion, and I'm showing it to you on the screen. But even this old camera, the D7000 from 2010, it already has the distortion correction right in camera. So for JPEG images, the distortion is already corrected right in camera, so no problems with that. But if you shoot RAW and you bring your RAW files to the editor of your choice, say Lightroom or Photoshop, it will show you the distortion, but it also has the correction profile there in the contemporary editors. So no problem with the distortion, but it really exists in this lens. And the next is the very, very interesting thing, is its bokeh and the out of focus areas. It has really, really weird shape, and I actually figured out why. Let me explain. The weird shape of the bokeh of this lens is actually derived from the fact that the aperture inside of the lens here, and I'm showing you at the close-up B-roll, it's not fully open, so you can still see the 7 aperture blades sticking out just a little bit. So you see, the lens is round itself, but if the aperture blades are not fully open, they create some shape, some form, some knot form. If they are not perfectly rounded, then there's going to be a knot form. And that's the case with this lens. Even at f1.8, so theoretically the wide open aperture in the pupil here must be fully rounded, but it's actually not, as you see. The blades are slightly closed down even at f1.4, and as I'm showing you on these examples, it actually gives the weird shape. Well, first it's the knot shape, as you see. Still it has some edges, some corners. Well, while it should be fully rounded with the open aperture, wide open, but here it has some corners, and it's also asymmetrical, as you see here. It has some corners on the one side and it's more rounded on the other side. Very, very weird. But even adding to that is the cat's eye shape bokeh balls, not balls but nuts, balls/nuts. To the side of the picture at a wide open aperture, you see it's asymmetrical, nut shape, and plus cat's eyes. And all these characteristics combined actually give you a really strange, weird, but actually original and very special bokeh with this lens wide open. But if you close down the aperture, it actually eliminates these differences, and you see on this picture at f2.8, yeah, the nut shape is more prominent here, of course, because you see the aperture blades that create this form, but the cat's eye shapes actually disappear, and the bokeh balls or the bokeh nuts are actually now symmetrical. No asymmetry any longer. And if you close down the aperture further, as you see on these pictures, well, it eliminates further and further until you don't see any shape of the bokeh at all. You just see these blurred lights and stuff, and even Sunstars appearing, but I'll show you Sunstars a little bit later in this video. So just beware that the bokeh in this lens is quite original and really special, and not all the people like it, as I know. So, but in my opinion, the more original bokeh is, the more artistic your picture looks. So yeah, if you want the perfect commercial picture, then look for the perfect and probably quite expensive lens. But with these cheap lenses, you can really get original and artistic pictures. Now let's see about the other picture qualities, the characteristics, the optical characteristics of this lens. So now about the picture quality. I have a number of pictures here, and you've seen the real life tests, like the real life shots, the real photography throughout this whole review, but here we have a little bit more of a controlled test. So the first three pictures we're going to be looking into chromatic aberration and longitudinal chromatic aberration. So what this is, let's see, it's 1.8, 2.8 and f4. And we don't see anything criminal here, but maybe slightly green part here. But when we zoom, even say halfway or at least 30%, we can clearly see that there's a green aberration and magenta aberration here. But let's zoom 1:1 and we'll see a lot of it. Here's the green one and the purple or magenta one, whatever you call it, but we don't see much of it with 2.8 aperture, but it's still there, the thin line of green and thin line of, you see, purple, magenta here, and almost no chromatic aberration from f4. And I didn't shot any additional tests because there is definitely no chromatic aberrations further, but there's maybe very thin line here of the purple chromatic aberration and no green here. So that's about it. But what is the longitudinal chromatic aberration? It's the one that actually appears when the blurred part, the bokeh, turns to the sharp part and vice versa. So it must appear somewhere around here in this part, and we don't see any. Let's zoom 1:1. We don't see any, absolutely any chromatic aberration. So the purple, the magenta one in front of plane of focus is closer here, and the green behind the plane of focus is farther here, but we don't see any on the border between the blurred part and the sharp part, which is a really good news, because some lenses definitely have these, you know, magenta and this part green. And of course it's even way better with stopping down the aperture. But what we can also clearly see is the sharpness going up, but it's not the sharpness itself so much, because even at 1.8 you see the sharpness itself is really good, at least in the center of the frame. But the contrast is lower with the f1.8 aperture, and it's absolutely in place at 2.8, and at f4 it's the same. So with the wide open aperture you lose a little bit of contrast. The sharpness basically stays the same, but you get a lot of chromatic aberration, so be careful about that. The next test is about the sharpness throughout the whole picture, and let's take the 4 consecutive pictures that I shot, and at full scale they all seem and look different and similar and decent, of course. Really, we don't see much of a vignetting or whatever sharpness loss in the corners, but it's just the full scale. You see, these are small pictures. But now we zoom 1:1 and see 1.8, 2.8, f4 and 5.6. We clearly see that 1.8 is a little bit soft in this distance, which is close to infinity or infinity itself. And it is much sharper in the center of the frame at 2.8, even better at f4, and at 5.6 it's absolutely perfect. So the center of the frame is better shot at 2.8 with such a long distance. But as you've seen from the real world photography throughout this review, the close-up and the middle distance actually is quite fine with the 1.8. So let's take a look in the periphery. It's the same story, a little bit soft at 1.8, actually much softer judging from the center. Sharper at 2.8, and at 4 and 5.6 it's way better. And in the very corner the same story, but the other corner looks a little bit different, and it may be just because of the field curvature. So my copy might be not ideal, but anyway, this corner looks way better, even at 1.8. I would say it is usable, considering that this is just the small part of the whole picture. Just take a look. This part, we're looking at this very corner. And it is, yes, a little bit softer than the others, but at 2.8, f4 and 5.6, they're brilliant and they're very good. And you definitely want to stop down the aperture with the landscapes anyway, most of the times. So it's not a problem that 1.8 don't have the brilliant sharpness through
out the whole picture. And now the four other pictures, which are actually f8, f11, f16 and f22. So generally the f8 must be the best picture of all with any lens. It's just a basic rule, and it is. Take a look in the center, it's the sharpest it can get. But at f11 it's already a little bit softer, and it's much softer at f16 and way softer at f22, because it is just the diffraction kicking in. And with the smaller sensor, with the APS-C sensor, which is in Nikon's 1.5 crop factor, so the diffraction already kicks in at f11. With the full frame cameras it might be f16 even could look good, but f11 would definitely look very good. But here with the APS-C, f11 already catches some diffraction, so the picture is way softer, and f16 and f22 is just simply unusable. But f8 is the best picture quality that you can get out of this lens. Sharp from corner to corner, really the best picture. And f11 is basically the same as f8, but just a little bit softer, and f16, 22 unusable. So that's our test. And of course we could compare, say, 1.8 and f8, but the results would be obvious, but just for your knowledge, just to see the difference, zoom 1 to 1, you see 1.8 and f8, how much sharper it gets, and especially in the corners we see, yeah, but it's still, in my opinion, at f1.8, if you really need it, it's actually quite usable in a full-scale picture. But if you can, just stop down the aperture if it is artistically acceptable to you. And then the next pictures we're gonna be looking one by one. And why is that? You see here these nice lights, and we're gonna be seeing into the Sunstars. So this is like 1.8, and next picture is 2.8, and we already see the Sunstars appearing. We don't see it at 1.8, well, really just a tiny piece of it. And here, but with 2.8 we already see starting to appear these Sunstars, and they get more and more prominent with the f4, f5.6 and f8, where we get the best picture quality. And yeah, here are the Sunstars, and more with f11, right? f11, 16 and 22. So at 22 they are really visible, and they're looking really nice with these lots of rays around. But as I've just showed you, at 22, f22, the picture is really soft, so there's not much use in these Sunstars when the other parts of the picture are going to be soft. So it's actually quite a pity that at f8 they are not so prominent. Would really like to see at f8 or at least at f11 more of those Sunstars. But anyway, you can get them if you stop the aperture enough. And what else I would like to show you, these dots you might be looking at, you know, these ugly dots, like the picture is sick. It's got illness of some kind. You see these dots. What are these? These are actually the dirt on my sensor, the camera sensor. I haven't cleaned it. You can clearly see them. This is a really dirty sensor. But when you open the aperture, you see 22 prominent, 16 less, 11, f8 and f5.6 you can barely see those stains, those spots, not visible. And considering that we very rarely close the aperture, you know, more than 5.6 or f8, and say when you shoot at f4, you see this is f4, no dots. f2.8, no stains, and f1.8, not even a trace. So if your sensor is really dirty, you will see it when you stop down the aperture severely. But if you shoot with the open wide aperture, even f4, you will not be seeing it even at an APS-C sensor. But of course, if you can, you must go and clean your camera sensor, and that's what I'm gonna do. Well, that's about the picture quality.
Now let's sum up. This is a very nice lens, inexpensive, fast, compact, quite sharp. It has not many optical flaws. The picture quality is really fine for its price. So, in my opinion, this is a must-have lens in the bag of any cropped sensor shooter from Canon. If you use Canon cameras, old DSLRs, contemporary mirrorless, this camera can work with mirrorless these days over the adapter. It has the motor inside. So this is really the one must-have lenses. You can have zooms, super zooms, wide-angle zooms, telephotos for your, for your specific needs, but for everyday photography, for artistic photography. This is a really, really good lens. And that's just about it. I'm staying with this camera and I keep this lens as well. I absolutely love it. And now, Paul Kretz was here with you. Just don't forget to press like and subscribe to this channel. Leave comments down below if you ever use this lens and what you think about it. If you can, just send me the pictures, send me the links to your portfolio. Well, YouTube doesn't like the external links, but you can use my contacts from this description to show me some of your works. That would be really interesting. Now, Paul Kretz was here with you, and I'll see you in the next videos. Or maybe not. It's up to you.